Hey guys, this is Caleb with DSLR Video Shooter, and today we're going to talk about paper backgrounds for videos. In many of my recent videos, you guys have asked about the backgrounds that I use for shooting in this space, what you see right now, as well as when I shoot B-roll, how it's lit, what I actually use for that. So today we're going to talk about that. And essentially it's pretty straightforward. It's just paper backgrounds, but there's a couple things I've picked up over the years as I've been using them. And the first thing I want to talk about is why you would want to use a paper background. There's several benefits. The first one is deep depth of field. So I'm using a G85 at f4.1. So if I move forward and back, there's not going to be a big shift in focus on my face. That's great, but with that smaller sensor and that higher f-stop, I'm not going to have as much blurred background as using like an A7S at f2.0 or something like that. So if I just had a wall behind me with stuff on it, it would all be in focus, which could be somewhat distracting. But by using a single seamless white piece of paper, essentially, it's not as distracting as a bunch of in-focus objects behind me. I also like how if I hold up a camera or some piece of gear that I'm talking about, it's not being lost in a background, a very busy in-focus background. So it's great for smaller spaces like the one I'm working in because I can have the background somewhat close to me, and right now it's probably 5-6 feet back behind me, and it's not in focus or it's not distracting. I also like how clean paper backgrounds look. They're also very affordable to set up. So instead of trying to paint a wall or have a shelf with a bunch of stuff and getting it perfectly level and framed up nicely, you don't have to worry about all that with a paper background. So now let's talk about mounting the paper, and then we'll get into colors I recommend as well as lighting these things. The most traditional way to mount a paper background is with two stands and a crossbar. You can find kits like this all over Amazon for very, very low cost. Behind me in this space, I have used chains on either end of the crossbar and mounted them to the ceiling. Now you'll want to make sure that you have a strong, stud or something that you can mount these to. It's not a ton of weight, but you definitely don't want it just to be hanging on some drywall. But this allows you to get everything off the floor because those stands, because of the legs at the bottom, are going to have the whole setup off of the wall by at least 1.5 feet, more like 2 feet, which means you'll have even less space between you and the background. So mounting the backdrop to the ceiling or the wall lets you get it right up against the wall and you don't have to worry about losing space. So I have two backdrops mounted like that right behind me, and I have another backdrop that is a different color in a different part of the studio, and we'll get to that when I do my studio tour, but essentially that's my B-roll station. So that's where I do a lot of B-roll, and those I have mounted on two C-stands with a crossbar. The reason I'm using C-stands is they're a lot stronger than the standard or cheap stands that come with a lot of crossbar setups, and I have plans to mount several different lighting grip gear on there as well as a second paper roll. And we'll get to that in a future video. When it comes to actually using the paper rolls on whatever bar system you go with, a tip that I found to work really well is when you first get the roll out, it's going to want to stay rolled up. So as you pull it down, what I recommend is sticking some clips at the bottom of the paper. That'll help it stay more flat and not want to curl back up. And over time, the paper will get trained and you can take the clips off. Another thing I recommend doing is finding a way to keep the paper from continuing to unroll. Because the paper is either going to want to roll back up onto the bar or it's going to want to keep going down. So what I do to solve this is I have two clamps on either end of the paper roll. I put one clamp in front of the bar that it's hanging on and one behind. And it's a great way to make sure the paper is not going to move around at all. If you already have stands you like or you want more hardcore heavy duty stands, there's a bunch out there, and there's some great crossbars that I've been using all around the studio. They're pretty affordable and they work really well. They're extendable so you can customize the size, and they're not as annoying as those big sections that come with a lot of backdrop stands. When it comes to the backdrops themselves, the best brand that I've found and used so far has been Savage, and they come in several different sizes, the most popular being 107 inches, 86 inches, and 53 inches. And they also have some smaller ones, so you could set up a nice little B-roll station and use those. So for colors and how I use them, I have one white, one black, and one kind of medium to dark gray. My favorite of the backdrops is the white because it's very versatile. First of all, obviously you can light it to look like an infinity white and pure white, but it also can be a gray as you see right now. So that's the white background behind me, and if you light it with less light, it's going to show up as gray. So it's a very versatile background, whereas if you start with gray, you really can't get anywhere near white. The thing I don't like about white is it can seem very washed out. So if I try to use a gel on a light and light it, it'll work, but it kind of washes out the color, whereas darker backdrops kind of soak up color. As for lighting the backdrops, there are so many different options. A lot of people will put a light stand right behind them so that it can't be seen and shoot a light directly at the backdrop. That would work very well. Often what I'll do is just above, out of frame behind me, or on either side, I'll use lights in various different ways to get some cool looks. If you want to make the background look more interesting than just a lit paper background, you can use what's called cookies. And cookies are essentially something you put in between your background and your light that has some texture, and the light is going to cast different shadows. An easy way to do this is take some foam core, cut out various shapes, shoot the light through it onto your background, and you can get something very interesting that way. You can easily add gels to add some color to your backdrop, and infinite options here, lots of different colors out there. I'll be covering video gels in a future video, really powerful stuff you can do with them. So those are just some tips on how I use paper backgrounds. I'd love to hear how you guys use them, and if you have any tips you'd like to throw in as well. Stay tuned for more gear reviews and tutorials here at DSLR Video Shooter. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.